Okay, good afternoon. Let's spend the next 40 minutes or so in a kind of a discussion around Swedish school policies. And I made it where we're heading. Maybe I don't have a very clear answer. If you will notice that before we end. For those who don't know who I am an independent author, independent expert on educational issues. Write books. I do a lot of principles training, and I also write reports for the European Commission about the Swedish school system. So I move sort of from policy level down to school leadership's level. I'm not anymore in any classrooms. I have a teacher background in chemistry and biology. I've written a few books. The last book is a book for principals, and we also made all of us are here today. Eva Hartell is the boss of this, and Sayem is also here. And we made this really interesting anthology where we have translated what we think is important text in educational science into Swedish to make them more accessible for Swedish teachers. So that's a way of lowering the threshold for teachers to get access to original research. It's not that easy, even if it's translated always. That's something. And the last book is a book that is directed to teachers, teaching teachers a handbook. Enough of that. We have three, according to the National Agency for Education, the Swedish National Authority. We have three main challenges in our school system. It's kind of interesting starting point, I think. If we're thinking about policy in Sweden, maybe we should think about, okay, what needs to be changed, what needs to be addressed, right? And we have a national authority that points to, we have three dimensions that where we maybe need then some policy changes. And the three ones is an acute teacher shortage, which is a dramatic. I have some numbers for some other countries in Europe. There is a concern all over Europe about teachers and teacher shortages, but I haven't met any country with the numbers that we are having, the official statistics of Sweden. I mean, I know that they were very, very worried in the Netherlands about the teacher shortage and around 40,000 teachers, but then the Netherlands is quite much larger population. So we are talking about 80,000 teachers the coming 4 years, and that is about a total population of teachers of around maybe 240,000 teachers. So that would mean very many classrooms with no trained teachers in them. The other challenge that the National Authority Agency points out is lesson equity in the system. That is, differences between schools are rising. So the between school variation in results are growing higher and has been doing so for quite some time. This is also very visible it's both visible in national statistics but also in measurements like PISA. And the third is segregation. That is segregation between schools. And typically it's like in compulsory schools, children with Swedish-born and or higher educated parents are concentrated into certain schools. And children of immigrant background or low education is more concentrated in other schools. And we have so this is what the National Authority, I will give you an example of what it looks like in a real municipality in a short while, one of my slides. So, what you would expect then would be politicians to coming up with, policy answers to these challenges, maybe. Or is that the way policy is made, that you identify problems, you then have different solutions? So right now we can see that the challenges, the most visible point of view of policy making in Sweden right now is because we finally got a government. And that government is based on a treaty written by the two of the parties that are part that now constitutes the government. but together with two other parties from the right-wing bloc. So they have signed a treaty on what are supposed to be done the next coming 3.5 years. But first, the OECD, this is what the OECD wrote, because they were also here to look at the Swedish school system, and they were not here by accident or by their own design. They were here because they were invited by the Swedish government to look into the system, to identify weaknesses, and the question was, do we need to do anything about this? And it was initiated by Jan Björklund, the Minister of Education at that time. So, and they said, under this heading, a school system in need of urgent change. That is what they saw. They saw an incoherent system that didn't deliver at the level that they thought that a country like Sweden should do. So they actually pointed out some things, and they saw the needs for a system-wide change and strengthen the performance. For example, they pointed out very clearly that we need to do something about our school choice system in Sweden and the funding mechanism in Sweden to ensure more equity and less segregation. That's a very concrete recommendation from the OECD. And for those of you who are Swedish, OECD is not a left-wing think tank. You might think that because they are giving this kind of strange leftist advice, but they are not. I assure you that. They came back just a week ago with new recommendations about how we could be better at teaching for immigrants and immigrant students. And they gave the same advice again. So that's an interesting point. They also, yeah, there's a lot of things to be said about that. But back to Sweden, to this treaty. What can we see will happen? What kind of policy responses do we have on these challenges that we have? For the first, teachers, and then I go back a couple of years. This is not from the treaty. I go back a couple of years. This is also in the treaty that this should continue. But one of the things that we have done is that we had two really interesting, unusual for Swedish circumstances reforms where the government more or less broke the normal formula for the Swedish labor market and directly from the government bypassed the labor, the unions and the employers' organizations and spent money directly on a group of employers, namely teachers. The interesting thing is that they did that in a way that upset most teachers. So actually, by giving more money to teachers, most teachers were angry. And the question is, why do you do policy like that? And the Swedish, what's the name in English? The Riksrevisionsverket, the National Audit Office, and also the other governmental organ that can, Statskontoret, another facility that makes inquiries and investigations of how the government does things. Both have written that that these reforms were badly done. And the main reason was because it was not done in a way that actually inspired teachers or made teachers that need the profession more happy about the situation. Because this was supposed to make teachers more happy and bring more teachers into it. It has done something for the average salary situation, and that has also created a great deal of chaos on the salary, on the labor market for teachers in Sweden. So actually it backfired quite much. The other thing, and then we go to is when it comes to equity, there has been a lot of money starting to be transferred to Swedish municipalities based on their socio-economical background of the municipalities. So a kind of extra transferal system to make more equality for funding for schools in Sweden. You should know that schools in Sweden, for those of you who are not Swedish, is totally managed otherwise by the municipality. Funding is determined by municipalities in Sweden. Now the government is sending out more money specifically for the school system. And I actually think this has worked very, very well. This means that a lot of municipalities that, for example, took an extremely strong responsibility for receiving immigrants during the Syrian crisis now have a lot more funding to actually try to develop their schools and their teaching. So this is actually a good policy response, I would say. This is my judgment on it. And then we have the segregation, which is of course then also a big problem. So, and where do we have the policy responses for segregation? Could anyone please tell me that? Because in that treaty, which I have been referring to, it is not even mentioned. The word segregation is not mentioned in the treaty at all. And not school choice either. So this is policy making. Why? Why isn't that? Why is that? So it has been shown to be something that is happening in society. It's something that actually goes against some of the central requirements of the Act of Education, the Swedish Act of Education, and basically, if you go back to regeringsformen, back to the Swedish basic laws, it's very strongly on inclusion and of equalizing the possibilities for everyone in the country. So there is actually nothing. And I would like to stay a little bit there. I will just show you a typical Swedish middle-sized municipality. I and a colleague at ENID, we made a study of segregation in Swedish middle-sized municipalities that is between 50,000 and 100,000 inhabitants. And we wanted to look on that level in the educational system where segregation is at the strongest in the compulsory schools. And that is on lower secondary, högstadium. Because when kids are very small, you place them at the school very close to you often. But when they grow up, the school choice is starting to be visible in the system. It was total 30 municipalities. In 16 of those, we could see that the school choice has a very strong impact on the sorting of students. In 13, we could see that the housing segregation is, you can't say that housing segregation is, that's the segregation we could find in those municipalities is more dependent on housing segregation than anything else. We found one municipality with no strong segregation according to the measures that we used. So that was Skövde. Yes. And this is very typical. This is then Sundsvall. What you can see here is we made a cutoff. We made a segregation index. We just took whether they had parents that were foreign born or the educational background of parents, and we just clumped those. This is a very rough, brutal method to do it. But we then made a segregational index out of those values. And so up here you have schools with Swedish-born parents, children with Swedish-born parents and well-educated parents. And down here you have immigrant and lowly educated or lowly educated parents. So very typical of 16 of these municipalities. And what you can see here is that the red schools, they are municipality schools. You can see them there. So, the blue ones are independent schools. And then it's interesting because we have two different school choice systems in the compulsory school. We have for the municipality schools, we have house, the proximity to the house is the admission rule. So if you live close to a school, you will be placed there in the municipality schools. But free schools have queue systems. So you opt for them, and if you have been standing long enough in the queue, you will get admission. So we can see the effect of school choice contra proximity. We can use this as a proxy, at least on this. And what you can see is typical for all these 60 municipalities is that you have the independent schools up here. So the independent schools, to a high degree, cater to Swedish-born parents and well-educated parents' children. Whereas very seldomly there are any independent schools that cater for immigrants or lowly educated.
Would you say that Sundsvall is representative?
Yes, of 16 of these 30 municipalities, yes. So if we look on all the 30 municipalities and we clump them, and you can see we have made a cutoff here, just to have that line should be up there, by the way. We should have made a cutoff, so we compared this group with above 20 with this group with below 20. We compare those groups, and we get this image. So in GN9, this is where in the upper, you could say, with Swedish-born, strongly segregated with Swedish-born and well-educated parents, 48% of those schools were independent schools, whereas 5% were in the lower level were independent schools. This is a very rude but effective way of showing a society where differences have grown very strongly, where school choice have facilitated the opting out of well-educated Swedish-born parents' children. And you can opt out of meeting the others. And this is fully in line with what very many international reports on school choice systems in other countries show. So we have these kind of reports from the United States, there are lots of them. We have them from Australia, we have them from New Zealand, we have them from the Netherlands. The main difference is that the Swedish system is a more marketized, it's a more cleaner market system than any other countries. So we have school choice and a universal voucher in ways that most countries haven't thought of having. We have also possibility for independent schools, for-profit driven independent schools, to establish themselves wherever they want to, with nearly no regulation on where they place their schools. So there is no local ways of changing this pattern. So this is a situation, a real situation, which is then not mentioned in the policy debate. When it comes to Swedish reforms, and we look in the rear mirror, this is what some analysts from the OECD wrote 2014 in a very, very interesting report where they looked into, actually mostly into the municipalization reform back in the 1990s, and they tried to draw some conclusions. But they said that after a series of bold and innovative reforms, Sweden is experiencing first-hand the power and challenge of steering such multi-layered systems, and the difficulty of changing course when reforms generate unexpected results. Because this we have to know, that the results that I just showed you is nothing that, or at least very few people in Sweden wanted. This was not what people thought that the reforms should generate. If we had known this, we would never have had these reforms. So what do we do now? And in 2014 they said maybe the time has come for change. Maybe there is now a dynamic for change in Sweden, so we can. But the question is, will we do the right things? Will they write something like that? Now, to be honest, Sweden is not the only country where school reforms are a bit fussy, messy, strange, non-logical, non-effective, non-evaluated. This is a slide from Beatrice Pont, who is a senior analyst at the OECD. I think she's still there. She held this talk in Stockholm a couple of years ago, and she had studied school reforms in most OECD countries. Mostly, I think it was concentrated on the European countries. But she studied all the school reforms, and this is what she's told us. Teachers and principals in countries all around the world are drowned by reforms. She says that there's an overlap of them, and that there is a wide reform of approaches. There is no clear vision. She actually was very frank when she was talking to us. She said that there's no way teachers and principals can keep up with the reforms happening in most countries. So policy making is very often a messy business, because what we're talking about here is the interface between a system and politics. It's about getting, winning elections, about, it's the whole policy messy process, because it's a human process, right? So I just wanted to have that like a Swedish brasklapp. But the question is, why are the responses so weak in Sweden, though? Because we have seen problems of this kind. The teacher shortage have been observable for quite many years now. I think also that the OECD analysts are are finding something when they say that the central government steering education at arm's length had few tools. Actually, as a minister of education in Sweden, you can't influence. Now they did it in a very strange way, but otherwise you can't influence salaries. As a minister of education, you can't influence the workload on teachers. In many countries, ministers of education can do that. They can just give an order, raise their salaries, less than they're working out. In Sweden, they can't. So by then handing over the governance of schools to all the 290 municipalities and then to 1,000 independent schools, the government has not so many instruments. That's probably one reason. And they could see very clearly, and that was also what the OECD could see in 2015 in that report, that there is a dilution of responsibilities. There is no one really responsible. We met that commission the last days they were in Sweden, and they said, what have you done? Nobody takes responsibility. Everybody says that it's, one partner says it's the government who doesn't take the responsibility, another points to the unions, another points to the municipalities, another to the etc. etc. So there's a lack of consistency in the system. And they also, in this report, point out that one of the problems declining student was also has something to do, probably has something to do with the market reforms, which we are not allowed to discuss in Sweden, by the way. In a way, and this is for me still. I'm in there on that, on segregation and school choice, because in Sweden we talk about school choice in some kind of imperial singularity. That's the free school choice. We talk about the fria skolvalet. But we actually have three different systems: one for upper secondary, two for compulsory schools. But even the mentioning of a change in how the school choice is offered meets strong resistance from the whole of the right-wing politics parties, the bloc of the right-wing politics.
I would say that in reality it meets resistance from everyone in power, because they are also parents.
Yeah,
on a personal level, I would have a guess that most well-educated, even left-wing parents would prefer to put their children into schools that are,
But we're not talking about abolishing school choice here.
No?
We're only talking about having another type of school choice.
Okay.
We're talking about just not having a queue system, for example.
Yeah. I'm not
To have a more.
I'm just saying one reason.
Yes, but we're not even having that discussion. It's even small changes to school choice system that directly get a negative response from a whole bunch of parties in the Swedish parliament. So not even that, And if you look at some of this, there's a strong majority in the professions against these systems that we have, because people in the system, they see what is happening. There is actually a strong opposition among most voters to these systems.
Yeah.
Yes.
On a principle level.
Yeah, on a principle level.
Yeah.
We could look on it in another way, which is interesting. We can lift our eyes and look on it on another situation, another perspective. And it's what Björn Åstrand, who has now been a special investigator for the government in different cases, but in a In a scientific paper he wrote a couple of years ago, he wrote this very interesting remark that market reforms have brought the Swedish schools back to a hybrid of public and private education and inequality that existed before the rather, and now I quote, short-lived success of the social democratic welfare state. So for an historian, we are back at a very tired society where elites have elite schools for themselves, and we have some other catering for the others. I think that is kind of an important, because if you're looking at because it's only the elite that can do that choices. It's the elite's privileges that those are the ones that get scared if we talk about changing.
Yeah.
And this gives me another parallel, which I think is very highly interesting. And I will go to Chile this spring to study what's happening in Chile. Because we had one other country in the world who had nearly exactly the same system as we had when it comes to school choice, universal vouchers for profit schools, and it was Chile. And of course there it was introduced during Pinochet's regime as a reaction to Allende and the socialist movement in Chile at that time. And he invited Milton Friedman's, this so-called the Chicago Boys of Chicago, to go in and make changes to the educational system and the whole system in Chile. And as one researcher has written about this, was a very, this gave a privileged position, it changed the power structure in Chile so that the privileged had more control over the system. Another thing is that this is really interesting. It severely weakened the capacity and propensity of the most disadvantaged in Chilean society to engage in political participation and collective action. Because one of my questions is, why does not all these people on the schools, on the lower parts of our diagrams from municipalities, why aren't they protesting? Why aren't they marching on our streets, demanding equal education? And according to many of these political scientists, it's because the system is rigged in a way that you lose that kind of connection with the kind of feeling that you have a possibility to have a political influence. And he wrote in 2008, if this is the case, the quality of Chilean democracy is seriously compromised. The interesting thing is now that due to protests in Chile, and very strongly influenced from student organizations that have gone to the street to protest against the qualities of the system, they are now changing it. So there is now no possibility to run a for-profit school in Chile on public money. And they also make some changes in the school choice system to make it more equal. And that is due to protests on the streets and in different political ways. So that leaves Sweden at that branch. And the question then, why is this not happening then in Sweden? One of the reasons, I think, is also because as I understand it, one of the differences between Chile and Sweden, and I'm really out there on the conspiracy theory part of this, is that in Chile the school owners were owning only very few schools. I mean, there were many for-profit schools, but they were singularities. We had one school. In Sweden we have an industry, and they have a lot of money to influence policy. We have strong evidence from scientists in Sweden on the strength of influence from lobbyists in the Swedish political system these days. We have the Rothstein's group in Göteborg with Maria Gardfjell, or whatever, I don't remember any. And we have Stefan Svallfors in Uppsala and stuff like that, so looked into the system. This is from another country, maybe you know it. It's on the north of Chile and the west of us, the United States of America, where in a very interesting study by Giants and all, where they tested different issues in the political system, and they correlated that with what kind of issues were then delivered into the legislative machinery in the United States. That is, how much did different groups in society influence policy? And their conclusion is that the United States of America no longer is a democracy. It's an oligarchy. That is, money buys policies. And I think we have been very naive in this sense in Sweden, with the influence of policymakers. And so we had the elite that maybe wants to protect their privileges, but we also have very, very, very good businessmen that are very good at making money. And they do it, all the things that, and they should do it. But we are allowing them, to make a lot of money in the system. I really, really like Arne Anka. He's a great philosopher of Sweden. He's a cartoon who was like travestying on Donald Duck. But he is here saying that I guess they are busy talking, that he is answering to why doesn't the politicians do anything? I guess they are busy talking to the lobbyists. His friend Crocodile says that. And Arne Anka, the great philosopher, says, the lobbyists, maybe then we should vote for them directly, skipping the that was a lot of bit. At last we have a government now then. This is then still interesting from a governance and policy level, because suddenly in this, in this treaty, there is suddenly a sentence that some of us have been discussing in the school system, and we thought that nobody would ever listen to us. For example, the Lärarnas Riksförbund, who has written this, that the government should take more responsibility for the school system. And then suddenly it says, a basis for the decision-making that can create the conditions for the state to govern schools should be produced. Out of the blue. Because one of the parties in this nightly discussions on what was to be in this treaty just got lucky, I guess. Probably. Yeah. But it's very interesting. It's still policy making.
But the same party is very much responsible for segregation as well. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
But segregation is then not mentioned with even one word. And profits in the school sector are not to be touched at all. If I could then have a guess, because that's what I said, where are we heading? I don't think we're heading towards, really acting on the issues that I think would be important to act on. I actually think that there is a dynamics when you go into creating a market. There are certain dynamics in the politics. That is, we will now try to have more control, even more control, even though we have, imposed control. They are national tests. But if you go the way into a market, it will work as itself, strengthening itself. The dynamics would. So I would say that we would go more towards that, probably.
That's interesting.
But there's kind of interesting writing here in the treaty about more government discussions. Maybe we could, and also if the discussions in society will change, maybe we could then work more towards more professionalism, a more egalitarian, more empowered population, more towards what we are famous for in the world, namely caring for everybody in society. Because that was our hallmark. When I describe the situation in the Swedish school system for Americans, they don't believe me. Actually.
Sweden?
Yes. That's exactly right. And we will describe the model with choice, vouchers, profits in a restaurant in Stockholm. And this female scientist says, "My God!" So everybody in turn, what are you talking about? At that table. Because she could not imagine anybody creating that kind of a model and actually think that that is a good way to govern schools. And that is one thing, you have to look into the school voucher model. Because that's a brutal way to finance schools. It doesn't really take, there's no logic in it to finance a school by individual vouchers for every student. That's the sole financing system. But still, I have no idea, because it's something that you learn living and be interesting in policy is that you have no idea what will happen next. Depends also on the headlines. And there is also possible.